August 17th, 1981. A Bonanno crime family captain walked into a house on a quiet street in Staten Island. He had given away his jewelry. He had handed over the keys to his apartment. He had said goodbye to his pigeons. He knew exactly where he was going. He went anyway. Dominick Napolitano did not run. He did not beg. He did not call the FBI, even though the FBI had offered. When the first bullet grazed him and the gun jammed, he looked up from the basement floor at the men standing over him and said 7 words. "Hit me one more time and make it good." They did. In Donnie Brasco, Michael Madsen plays Napolitano as a tough, likable captain who fades from the story once the credits begin to roll. The film gives him no final scene, no last words, no ending. The real ending is one of the most extraordinary moments of composure in the history of organized crime. And it began, not in that basement, but 6 years earlier, when a jewel thief named Donnie Brasco walked into a bar in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and Sonny Black Napolitano decided to trust him. Dominick Napolitano was born on June 16, 1930, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. His grandparents had emigrated from Naples. He was not Sicilian by blood, which in the rigid ethnic hierarchy of the American Mafia meant he would always have to prove himself harder than those who were. He was born with blonde hair, an oddity in a world of dark Italian features. By his 40s, it had turned a gunmetal silver white. He dyed it black to hide the change. That vanity gave him his name. Everyone in Williamsburg knew him as Sonny Black. He grew up on the same streets he would later control: Graham Avenue, the storefronts, the social clubs, the walk-up apartments where old men played cards and young men learned which conversations to forget. Napolitano rose through the Bonanno family the way all ambitious soldiers did, through violence, reliability, and the patience to wait for the men above him to die or go to prison. He started as a soldier under Capo regime Michael Sabella in the early 1970s. Sabella was aligned with the powerful and feared Carmine Galante, the cigar-smoking heroin boss who had tried to seize control of the entire Bonanno family. When Galante was executed at Joe and Mary's restaurant in July of 1979, shot dead at his table with the cigar still clamped between his teeth, the power structure above Napolitano collapsed overnight. Sabella was demoted, Napolitano was promoted. He inherited the crew, the territory, and the opportunity. By 1980, Sonny Black Napolitano controlled one of the most profitable crews in the Bonanno family. He operated out of 2 locations on Graham Avenue: the Withers, Italian-American Veterans of Foreign Wars Club at number 415, and the Motion Lounge at number 420, directly across the street. He lived in the apartment above the Motion Lounge. On the roof of that apartment, he kept pigeon coops, an old-school Brooklyn hobby that connected him to the neighborhood men who had come before him. His crew ran burglaries, hijackings, extortion, loan sharking, bookmaking, bank robberies, and narcotics. He had expanded operations into Pasco County, Florida, where he ran an illegal casino and a nightclub called the King's Court Bottle Club, negotiating territorial permission with Tampa boss Santo Trafficante Jr. himself. Napolitano was genial, handsome, and adored by women. He was also capable of extreme violence without hesitation. The men in his crew respected him because he led from the front. He did not ask anyone to do what he would not do himself. And then he met Donnie Brasco. The man who called himself Donnie Brasco was FBI Special Agent Joseph Pistone. Pistone had been operating undercover since 1976, initially infiltrating truck hijacking crews and stolen goods fences, before working his way into the orbit of Bonanno soldier Benjamin "Lefty" Ruggiero. Through Ruggiero, Pistone was introduced to Napolitano. A territorial dispute between captains resulted in Brasco being claimed by Sonny Black's crew, a prize, not a burden. Napolitano saw in Brasco a capable earner, a reliable presence, a man who brought in money and never caused problems. He trusted him, not in the cautious, transactional way that most mobsters trust associates. He trusted him the way a man trusts a friend. This trust would prove fatal. Napolitano vouched for Brasco at every level. He brought him into meetings with other captains. He introduced him to Joseph Massino, the ambitious power broker who would later become the Bonanno family's boss. He took Brasco to Florida. He included him in conversations about internal family politics that no associate should ever have heard. And in 1981, Napolitano set Brasco on the path to becoming a made member of the Bonanno family. To earn his button, Brasco was given a contract: kill Bruno Indelicato, the son of murdered Captain Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicato, a loose end from the brutal three captains' murders that had taken place on May 5th of that year. The three captains hit was the event that cemented Napolitano's position and sealed his fate simultaneously. The Bonanno family had been tearing itself apart in a power struggle between two factions, one loyal to imprisoned boss Philip Rusty Rastelli, led by Massino and Napolitano, the other aligned with the Sicilian faction under Alphonse Indelicato, Dominick Trinchera, and Philip Giacone. Massino arranged a sit-down. The three rival captains arrived at a Brooklyn social club, expecting a negotiation. Hitmen imported from Canada, including Vito Rizzuto from Montreal, were waiting inside. All three captains were executed within seconds. One of them was so large that the killers had to step over his body to leave the room. Napolitano was instrumental in organizing this massacre. It demonstrated his loyalty. It elevated his standing. It also created the expectation that his judgment could be trusted absolutely. So when the FBI pulled Pistone out of his undercover assignment in July of 1981, 6 years into the operation, with Brasco just weeks away from a murder contract and a ceremony that would have made him a made man inside the Bonanno family, the consequences for Napolitano were not merely professional, they were existential. The man he had championed, vouched for, sponsored, brought into the inner circle, and set on the path to induction was not a jewel thief from Miami. He was a federal agent with 6 years of recorded conversations, wiretap evidence, and first-hand testimony about murders, extortion, drug trafficking, and the internal structure of the Bonanno crime family. Napolitano had handed the FBI the keys to the kingdom, and everyone knew it. The FBI selected Special Agent Doug Fencl to deliver the news. They chose Fencl because Napolitano had once mentioned him on a wiretap, calling him a stand-up guy for an FBI agent. For 3 days, Fencl and 2 other agents sat in a car outside the Motion Lounge, waiting for a moment when Napolitano was alone. On the 3rd morning, the surveillance team confirmed no one else was in the apartment. Fencl knocked on the door at the bottom of the stairs. Napolitano called down. "Who is it?" Fencl identified himself. Napolitano said, "Come on up." The 3 agents sat at a small table in Napolitano's living room. He was calm. Fencl asked if he knew Donnie Brasco. Napolitano did not confirm or deny. Fencl told him that Donnie Brasco was FBI Special Agent Joseph Pistone. Napolitano received this information the way another man might receive the weather. No outburst, no shock, no denial. He simply absorbed it. The agent stood to leave. Fencl handed him a business card and said, "Sonny, you know better than anybody what this is going to mean." Napolitano said nothing. The agents walked down the stairs. As Fencl reached the door, Napolitano called after him, "Doug." Fencl stopped. "You know better than anybody. I cannot do this." He would not cooperate. He would not inform. He would not save himself. Joseph Massino's reaction was immediate and absolute. According to later testimony from Massino's brother-in-law and underboss Salvatore Vitale, Massino said 5 words that functioned as a death sentence. "I have to give him a receipt for the Donnie Brasco situation." In Massino's calculation, it did not matter that Napolitano had been deceived. It did not matter that the FBI's infiltration was unprecedented in its depth and duration. What mattered was that Napolitano had vouched for the agent. The Bonanno family had been compromised at its core. Someone had to pay. Accountability in the Mafia does not consider intent. It considers result. Napolitano knew. In the days before August 17th, those closest to him noticed the change. He was not frantic. He was not desperate. He was settling his affairs. He walked into the motion lounge and found his favorite bartender. He removed his jewelry, his rings, his watch, his chain, and handed them over. Then he gave the bartender the keys to his apartment and asked him to make sure someone took care of his pigeons. The gesture was not symbolic. It was final. He was not coming back, and he knew it. Bonanno capos, Frank Lino, and Stephen Cannoni picked him up and drove him to a house in Eltingville, Staten Island. The house belonged to the parents of Bonanno associate Ron Filicomo. When they arrived, Captain Frank Copper met them at the door and said the meeting would be held in the basement. Napolitano descended the stairs. The moment he began walking down, Copper slammed the door shut behind him. It was the signal. Someone shoved Napolitano from behind. He lost his footing and tumbled forward. At the bottom of the staircase, Robert Lino Sr. and Ron Filicomo were waiting with guns drawn. Lino fired first. The bullet grazed Napolitano. Then the gun jammed. In that silence, that impossible, suspended silence between a misfire and what comes next, Dominick Napolitano looked up from the basement floor at the men who had been his colleagues, his peers, his brothers in the oath they had all taken together. And he spoke his last words. "Hit me one more time, and make it good." Filicomo raised a .38 caliber revolver and fired several rounds. Napolitano died on the concrete floor of a stranger's basement in Staten Island. He was 51 years old. His body was not found for nearly a year. On August 12, 1982, a decomposed corpse was discovered at South Avenue and Bridge Street in Arlington, Staten Island. The face was unrecognizable. Dental records were required for identification. The hands had been severed, a message to every member of every family about the price of a bad introduction. The connection between a handshake and a man's word, between vouching for someone and dying to that endorsement, was written on the body itself. Days after Napolitano disappeared, FBI surveillance teams noticed workmen dismantling the pigeon coops on the roof of the motion lounge. The pigeons were gone. The coops were broken apart and hauled away. The rooftop was bare. Napolitano's girlfriend, known only as Judy, later contacted Joe Pistone through intermediaries. She told him that in the final days before his death, Napolitano had said he bore no ill will toward Pistone. He understood that Pistone was doing his job, and if anyone was going to be responsible for taking him down, Napolitano said, he was glad it was him. He told Judy he had genuinely loved Donnie Brasco, not as a business asset, but as a person. He could not reconcile the man he had known for 6 years with the reality of what that man actually was. The things they had done together, the conversations they had shared, the feelings between them. None of it had been fake for Napolitano. All of it had been a job for Pistone. In 2003, Joseph Massino was arrested and charged with ordering Napolitano's murder, along with a litany of racketeering crimes. In 2004, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. In an extraordinary turn, Massino then became the first sitting boss of a New York crime family to cooperate with the federal government, the ultimate violation of the code that Napolitano had died to uphold. The man who ordered the execution of Sonny Black for allowing an FBI agent into the family eventually broke omerta himself to save his own life. Pistone was asked about Napolitano's death in an interview years later. He said, "My intention in all of this was to put people in jail, not get them killed." He paused. "I was sorry it was Sonny. I was glad it was not me." The Motion Lounge at 420 Graham Avenue no longer exists. The building was demolished. The pigeon coops are gone. The neighborhood has changed. Williamsburg is now coffee shops and art galleries, and young people who have never heard the name Napolitano. But somewhere beneath the surface of that street, in the memory of that bartender who accepted the jewelry and the keys, in the silence of a basement in Staten Island, where a man who knew he was going to die told his killers to finish the job properly, the story remains. Dominick Napolitano did not run. That is the fact that outlasts everything else. He could have cooperated. He could have disappeared. He could have traded what he knew for a new name and a house in Arizona. He chose the basement instead. Not because he was stupid, not because he was loyal to the men who killed him, but because the oath he had taken decades earlier was, to him, more real than his own survival. He had lived by it. He would die by it. And when the gun jammed and the silence opened up and the entire world narrowed to a concrete floor and the faces of men he had once called brothers, he did not beg. He did not curse. He gave his last order. Hit me one more time, and make it good.